Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I am so excited to introduce you to our guest. Before I do that, here is a quote just for this episode. Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. Soren Kierkegaard. Our guest today has been on the show almost more times than I could count in the seventh grade. Wasn't paying that much attention in the seventh grade. But I'll tell you right now, if you haven't listened to episode 426, 582, 443, 706, 860, 767 of the Culture Matters podcast, you either don't like me, don't like the show, or maybe both, but you definitely like or would love the guest. Author of The Life of Victory, Mastering the Secret of Choosing Love Over Fear. Eric Guy, the one, the only friend of the Culture Matters podcast, somebody I deeply admire, respect, great family man, wonderful father, husband. I think I'm giving a liturgy right now. Well, we have about 10 minutes left
Yeah.
for our time for the Culture Matters podcast, but thanks because the intro was so long. Thanks for coming back on the show, man. I always enjoy our conversations. And when we get to record them, it's just that much better for other people, really, not for me, but for other people because they get to participate in our friendship and so thanks for coming back.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jay. It's always great to be. There's no way I've been on here 6 times. Really?
Man,
You
I
you owe me a couple on my show then.
895, 860,
Wow.
443, 706.
I wrote them down.
It might be seven. I think I missed one. I think I missed
Wow.
895. Generosity. It's one, two, three, four,
Wow.
five, six, seven. It's nine times, Eric. I'm sorry,
Wow.
10 times. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10. Because there were other ones too with other people even.
Oh, that's yeah, 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 yeah,
And and
yeah,
and
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I love
New
having
Year's Eve
people I
too. That
like
was cool.
back.
Yeah.
That's to our audience's benefit. So thank you for investing the time to come on the show and create such valuable, curate such valuable conversations for our audience.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Love being on. Love the conversation.
I want to give a shout out to anyone listening that is in business, in and around contracting, construction, the top contractor school. Eric is a leader, a mentor, a someone to rely on. If you haven't heard of it, look into it. But I want to ask you about uh, what you've learned in the last year in that experience, and like some of the interesting conversations that come up that are business conversations, because our listeners are many business owners or
Hmm.
those aspiring to be more successful within their company they work for and with, or they want to start a company. So I want to give a shout out to the top contractor school and your role as a leader within that. So yeah, what have been some of the lessons this year or observations that you've experienced through mentoring and guiding so many of these small business owners?
Well, I think the first one is, a lot of folks might know how to do the job, but they don't necessarily know how to do the business. And I've always, I've felt that pain when I first started too. It's like, hey, we know how to do the work, and then when we have to start running the business, it's harder to drop the work because that's what comes natural. I think the second one in this community, and I was drawn to this community, by the way. I wouldn't have naturally seen myself in this place years ago. It wasn't necessarily part of the plan. So let me tell the folks that, because I think that is important. I believe in that community. I believe that most of the people that come in there are hungry, meaning that they want to get better, and not just in their businesses. I believe they generally want to get better, not only in their businesses but in their families. If they have kids, right, in their with their marriage, in their communities as well. And I think a lot of them the challenge today with a lot of companies, just like everybody else, is are the people challenges. And then with that, of course, I mean, you know this well. It's how do you build that out, and how do you create a culture that's sustainable and just doesn't collapse on itself? I was talking to one of the contractors this morning, and he's third generation, great company, family's well known in that community. Uh, but he's like, Monday morning with this heat wave that's going on, one of his drivers came and said, "Hey, look, I'm done." Didn't even finish out the week, right? Just that day, he's like, "There's something wrong here that I'm not doing to bring people in. I either don't have the right person. I'm not creating a culture where people are going to stay. So I need to figure that out." And there's a lot of other things, but that's what I hear the most of, just how to run the business, how to deal with people, how to deal with family. Because we have
Yes.
a lot of people that are working with family. I mean, me too. I mean, I have four family members that work here. Well, I'm the fourth, but so I get that piece of it.
People that are listening may not be aware of this. In your early career, troubled adolescence, acting out, you were called into those scenarios and to solve not just the symptoms, but the problems in those scenarios, the troubled youth. What did you see are some of the elements of the breakdown with parents to children in that response, in that respect, the elements of breakdown, things that could break down that influence, that adolescent rebellion? What were some of the variables of breakdown? And I'm going to bring this to business
Yeah.
shortly, but like, I'm curious about that. That's a very
Well, the
interesting
biggest thing,
expertise.
yeah, the biggest thing is connection. Because when there's an issue, we typically lose connection. When we lose connection, we lose the ability to regulate through that relationship, and that's one of the biggest issues that parents face, is they become just as dysregulated sometimes as the kids that so-called have the problem. And it's funny, from funny ironic, uh, that when you look at the physiology of the leader, which in this case would be the parents, and you work on that physiology, and you change, uh, I guess, just in common terms, you change the vibe, right? Right, and the situation becomes regulated, the environment becomes regulated, then it's easier to work on those situations. And healing starts when you create the environment to let it be healed.
What were some uh, components to creating that environment of healing?
Well, one, working on the parent's own emotional state, because they had, when I was called in, like I used to. So for those of you that don't know, when I was called in, I usually would stay for a period of days, like 3 days minimum. And these families, because you can imagine that gets a little pricey, but these families had already spent six figures, sometimes close to seven figures, just for treatment. So they've already been wrapped up in a lot of bad reactive advice at that point. And I can say that pretty confidently, because if they weren't, they wouldn't be calling me, or anybody else for that matter. But when you go in and you work on the emotional and the physiological state of the people that can actually be responsible, because that's a crazy paradigm. I mean, therapy is a crazy paradigm. Like, individual therapy with a kid, what does the kid actually have control over? And you're making them responsible, or putting them in a situation where they need to be responsible for the emotional states of their parents. That to me is crazy, to think of it from that perspective. When I think of it from a perspective of, okay, when I take the responsibility for that, when I work on my emotional state, my own physiology, my own fear. right? Mastering the ability to love over fear. And you could, maybe that sounds too touchy feely with people, but it's a difference between influence and control. Like, do you want to, like in the business world, do you want to just control everybody because that's external motivation? You can't grow a company like that. I mean, you can, but you're constantly driving. You can't step away, because if you step away, then nobody's there to provide the external motivation. When people want to come to work, when they want to do well, when kids generally want to do well. Like, they want to know what's going on. They want to know. They want to race after. I just had this conversation with my daughter last night. They want to run after their genius. Like, we forget as adults, and that's why we're so dysregulated. But if we would just get out of kids' way most of the time, they'd be fine. But we screw them up with our own fears, our own baggage, our own trauma, and just we dump it on them. And then it's like, well, you take care of how I feel. The leader that takes responsibility says, I need to take care of how I feel so I can take care of how my people feel. And I can create an environment that really, I guess, vibes at a higher level, right? And that's where people want to do the work. They want to come in. And again, it's not perfect. I'm not saying it's, some people just don't want that. Some people like to be miserable, but those people move out.
What happens or when either either or both parent is talking to the child negatively about the other parent?
Oh, that's horrible. I mean, because even if the energy that they have when they're doing that just filters more negativity into that situation. From even from a physiological standpoint, when a lot of people will refer to that as entrainment. So the process of physiologic alignment. All right. And if you look at, I always refer back to Bruce Lipton, The Biology of Belief, when he looked at the cells in the body, right? Uh, when the cells are constricted, right? And I always use my fist for that because it's the easiest way for people to understand it. When my fist is constricted, I'm not open. So the cell's not open. So it's more prone to illness, sickness, disease, and disorder. When the cell's alive and it's thriving, I'm more apt to be healthy, to be thriving in my environment. And what happens is, when you're like this, and this, right? You've been around those people just from a cellular perspective that you just enjoy being around, because healthy cells congregate towards other healthy cells. It's natural. That's what that research from Lipton, that's what he saw in that, like, congregation towards one another when we're healthy. When you put something that's toxic in the environment, the healthy cells move away. And so it's this game. So if the parents like this, right, and the expectation of the child is to be like this, where the parents like that, that doesn't make sense. And so what naturally happens is, if I keep pulling this in, this is going to match for one way or another. So the child's just going to get angrier, or just move away, or just stay stuck where they're at, and they'll become dysregulated as well.
Do you think do children attach their identity to the alignment or misalignment of the parents?
It can become disastrous later on, right? And if it's too dysregulated, it can really hook them. But I think, the old adage, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. They feel that, and then you see it in their behavior. It just it's like just a transfer of energy, right? It's
Mm.
just here you go. And then when they act out, so a lot of adults will hide their dysregulation. We can hide ours much better, right? Alcohol, food, shopping, drugs, whatever. Kids start acting out, and we go, "Oh my goodness, you need to toe the line." Well, it's like, well, dad or mom's a closet alcoholic. how's that any different than a kid acting out in a store? They're just it's just this search for regulation, and it goes back to your question. The biggest breakdown is connection.
Mm.
When we're not connected, we're hardwired. Regardless of your personality, our brains are hardwired for connection. When we don't have that, we are fundamentally at risk.
Mm.
And this is why things that are even negative, like gangs, are so popular because at least I have some sense of connection, right? Might not be good, but I'm here.
I want to take that into a business context now.
Yeah.
Cliques forming in an organization, I would argue, consequence of an absence of connection between individual agent management.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thoughts?
Yeah. Absolutely. That and what we just talked about, bringing it back to the contractor, top contractor school. Uh, we talked about vision, right? Because when I don't feel, when that, as in your terms, when that agent doesn't feel connected to the management, and they don't, then they can't even hear the vision. But usually when they're not connected, there's a lack of vision or a lack of communication of vision. There's some kind of separation. So when there's no connection, how do you expect them to follow a vision that they're not bought into because nobody's bought into them?
How do people expect that? Why do you think that so often can be the case where managements expect?
Because that's what we've done. That's how we've been conditioned our whole lives. Like we've been sat in a classroom, right? Unless you had, like, I remember a couple great teachers, right? Phenomenal teachers that I had, thank goodness, right? Yeah, I just didn't want to not do well in their class, right? I was never the top in any of my classes, but they had such a connection that, I just, you wanted to do well. Like you chose to do a little bit better. And, that for me made the difference between maybe failing out of a class and having a B, maybe an A, right? But it was because of that connection and wanting to put in the work. You think about the best manager you ever had, and they were probably, whatever you want to call it, they were thriving, throwing off good vibes, physiologically just vibing at a high level. You want to do more things for them. You show up, as opposed to the manager who's just bringing you down, bad vibes, negative, controlling. You do the bare minimum, right? And then that manager gets more upset, more angry, cycles down because now I have to control you more to get just a little bit out of you. And so then they don't take responsibility, and it somehow becomes the employee's situation.
How would you advise our listeners to take responsibility when their people might be letting them or the organization down?
I
How,
think the
how does one even begin that process of?
Well, the biggest thing you can do is become self-aware. And somebody's going to listen to this and say, "Well, I'm pretty self-aware." We find that most people aren't, right? They've done studies. Um, there's one TED talk that took 5,000 people. Her name's Tasha Urich, and they were just doing a self-awareness study, and they found out that 95% of the people thought they were self-aware, and then when they looked at it, only 15% were. Leaders aren't self-aware, and they're not very authentic, meaning they're not responsible with the talents and the gifts that they have. If I were to say that, they're not living in their genius, so they're not regulating a thriving environment, or not producing a thriving environment, so nobody else can. or it becomes very difficult for people underneath them to do that.
What are some unintentional ways that you've seen leaders lower the likelihood of receiving candor from their people?
Well, one is I think we're not aware of some of these physiological states. Like we don't want to approach people because we just feel like, oh, I don't know what it is about that person. I just don't want to approach them. So they're not approachable, and you can't have that candor with them. I can't remember who I was talking to the other day. Might have been on Brian's show actually, and one of the I heard. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but used to be a manager here with the Pirates. Baseball manager, Clint Hurdle. And one of the things that he said when I saw him in January, he was speaking to a very small group, and he said one of the things that I I always do or always start. I can't remember where he got the idea or he just started it out. He's like, I would tell people from day one, come in and I want feedback. I want you to tell me what I'm doing wrong. And he said they weren't used to it because they thought the hammer was going to drop when they said something. And he said after a while it was like, man, you really don't have to tell me all of that. But he just opened it up and he kept telling them it was okay without the reactivity or a rebuttal. He just absorbed it. He was like, okay, right, because it's their perspective. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's off balance, but that led into that conversation where people trusted him. And so when he would go to give them feedback, they were very responsive to that.
All hands meeting. You got five team members in the meeting. What ratio do you think the authority in that meeting is talking versus the team members? Is there a ratio? Is like we know when it's too much, we know when it's what's that saying? Too little. It's like you don't know, you can't quite put your finger on it, but it's like it's like porn. You know it when you see it.
Yeah.
That's a quote from somebody. It's like you don't quite know, but you know it when you see it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if you have a meeting, a gathering, and there's the authority right, there's a title in the room. What's the ratio of listening to speaking from your experience in all these
For
different
me,
environments?
with a lot of groups, what I try to shoot for in my head, and there probably have been very few times where I've achieved it. So let me say that. Let me preface it that way. Just 80/20. I need to only be talking 20% of the time. I need to be listening 80% of the time. I can do. I think I do that better in individual sit downs. Um, when
So
I'm.
if it's an hour, it's 12 minutes and 48 minutes.
Mm-hmm,
Why that ratio is a golden aim from a psychological perspective, from a like I'm giving example, like let's go back to the kid and the parents for a second.
mm-hmm.
Parents are anxious about the child's behavior, so they have a family meeting. How receptive will it be if the parents are talking at the kid for 48 minutes versus 12 minutes?
Yeah, and usually the kid doesn't even get 12 if it's that situation because the parent will just continue to go, go, go. And then they're like, well,
Yeah,
they
so
don't.
how does that destroy that possibility for their relationship, their connection?
Yeah.
And then I
You're
want
not
to go back
listening. You're in your world, right? A lot of times when we talk, we're not in that other person's world or that group's world. Uh, if you've hired good people, let them be good people. You can't go in and dictate to them for 48 minutes and then just give them a little bit of time and say, "Hey, go figure this out." Be the one in the room that's listening. And the other reason that I do that, Jay, that I think that way is like, because if I only said 50-50, I'm probably not shooting for 50. Right? I'm not going to get to 50. If I don't get to 80, but I get to 60 or 70, that's still a big win. But I will say, because like when I'm coaching somebody, I really, and if it's just individual one on one, I really pay attention to the time. Because a lot of times they have, and that also leads to empowerment. So instead of just them relying on me for the answers, they they eventually find out that they have the answers. And so they get to listen to themselves talk out loud and themselves find the answer, find the solution. And then that boosts their confidence.
How would you recommend well, hmm, I want to go back to the parents. How would you recommend the parents relating to one another? So I was in a scenario, let's say the parents, they're anxious about the child because they have skin in the game. They care about the child.
Mm-hmm.
What's advice for that? How they can communicate around the child's problems that doesn't become where the parents are just talking poorly about the child and disconnecting themselves from the child and resenting the child. Like, how do you have the conversations? Is that where the third party comes in, or
You can, but I mean, eventually, it goes back to what we said about the leaders. How much self awareness do you have? I mean, you got to own your own crap. Parents throw up all over their kids all the time, and the things that they're afraid of are the things they've either experienced or think are going to happen. It's driven out of a fear state, and you can't parent well or lead well out of a fear based state.
why not?
Well, think about what that does. Then you're just nobody's going to learn. You're not getting better as a leader. Uh, the gentleman I was talking about today, that I talked to this morning. I mean, the first call he had to cancel, which is not unlikely. I've had these, the beginning calls with contractors all the time where they're just frantic, right? I was there myself years and years and years ago where it's like, oh, I don't know what to do. Like I can't leave my business for a minute because it's all going to topple over. Uh, and by just listening, right, he started the conversation just very chaotic, very dysregulated. And by the end, you could tell in his voice that he had calmed down a little bit, that he was in a much better spot. But being in that where you have bad stress, that's always going to deteriorate. You're not going to bring out the best in yourself, and you're not going to bring out the best in others. You can lead from there. It's just going to be difficult. It's always going to be difficult. Right? And you're probably going to push away, exclude the really good people inside the company, because typically they're not the ones that are going to tolerate that for very long,
Why not? Why won't they?
because they kind of see the writing on the wall. I mean, they either feel it or they're like, hey, look, I don't, I'm confident enough that I'm not going to buy into this. They have that feeling. They look a little bit into the logic of it here. The leader's done this, this, and this. Very rash, very explosive, very reactive, or might maybe sometimes just hasn't responded at all, which is the flight mode. And they're like, there's other places, especially nowadays. There's other places you can work where you can go work for a great leader. And I would argue that most people would rather have a really good leader and a really good culture than a much bigger salary. We all need money, but I would much rather work in an environment with great people who are aligned physiologically, but even from from a culture standpoint, but aligned physiologically because it just produces more.
The non-responsive. What do you mean?
They don't do anything. They just leave you hanging. They don't get back to you. They either push it off, they avoid. You send them an email, they don't get back to you for 5 or 6 days, even though they could be just right down the hall or on the next floor.
What does that do to culture?
No, that's horrible. Right? There's no back and forth. There's no communication. Um, there's a lack of trust. Huge lack of trust when you can't when you can't really rely on the person that's supposed to be your manager and your leader. So then it just becomes a battle of, hey, I just show up to work and I survive. Can't wait till Friday.
What are some of the great reasons, or in your breadth of experience working all these different companies? I'll say it for you: the personality assessments and the suite of services that you've not only learned from over the years, decades, but provided to companies of all sorts of sizes. These are assessments to take at all levels of leadership and management employees through an understanding of themselves, of their current state of consciousness and behavior. So you've studied it, you've sold it and implemented it and facilitated it all over the world, right? So from that experience, that breadth of experience, what are some of the reasons that management comes up with to be inaccessible, to under communicate relative to the responsibility that comes with their title?
This is like a whole other episode, Jay.
This is a cliffhanger for part two. Hey, we talked before. You got to come on at least 20 more times this year.
Yeah. I think the big thing is to think about all the excuses that we use, especially the generational ones, right? You've got a lot of people my age that'll talk about two generations below us. So they don't want to work. They don't want this. They don't want that. Uh, and there are differences. I know that. I talk about those differences. But when you use things like that as an excuse and don't wade into that, they become your reality. The perception becomes the reality. And then you start to see those things. Well, what I, from my experience, when you still get good talent, regardless of their age, and you invest in them and you connect with them, they want to do better. They want to do more. They'll go above and beyond. And I think that's the biggest thing is whatever, think about the stories that go on because the stories create the culture too, right? What are those stories from the past that they could have, they may have been true or now they are, or maybe they were half truths, but everybody still hangs on to them, regardless if they're correct or not. But pay attention to the stories, like when what's being said, what's being told, and sometimes they just need changed. You need to change the script, just like with adults, right? Or just individuals that I coach, even. The big thing is just changing the script. You just have to look at things differently.
Just took a picture of us. Man, this has been fun.
Yes, sir.
What a deep dive and such a valuable conversation. Best one yet in my view.
Whew.
If you're listening to this episode of the Culture Matters podcast, I don't want you to do anything else with your life in the preceding days. I want you to listen to every single episode that Eric Guy has been on the Culture Matters podcast. Episode episodes 426, 670, 767, 778, 676, 582, 706, 443, 860, 895. Re-listen to this episode. It'll make you a better person. How do people subscribe to your podcast?
Podcast, YouTube, you can go to Center for Victory, or it's just the podcast is your best day yet at Center for Victory.
You'll see Eric as a regular of the Brian Hess Show. And if you're interested in the top contractor school, look into that. It'll make you a better person. Man, share this with a friend. We'll see you next time, my friend. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yes, sir.